So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do basically do another example of using AJAX to give the user a better user experience, but this time instead of using the method that I used before, which is going back and literally getting an entire page, pulling out a portion of it, and injecting it into the DOM, this time I'm going to build it in such a way that I'm just getting back what I need to get back. In essence, on this page I'm going to display a collection of list items, and when I click on a link in one of the list items, I'm going to go back to the server and I'm going to get the details for that particular list item, and I'm going to basically swap out the list item that I get back. So in doing this, one of the things that I know I'm going to have to do is that I know I'm going to have a partial view, and more important than that, I'm going to have an action that returns that partial view. So what I'm going to start out with, I'll start out with my controller, and I'm going to call this controller HTML fragment controller. Okay, I'm going to build this, and again, I started off. You could start off pretty much with this example from the end of our 6th class, and what I'm going to do here is, let me go back here and let's close some of this stuff out, and let me go here. Alright, so I'm going to do this HTML fragment. Okay, and again, I don't have a view here, so this is not going to end up running. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off again by looking at my models. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a folder for these models. So if everything's not in one folder, right? I'm going to create a folder called HTML fragment. Now, so one of the things, I'm basically going to have two actions and two views. I'm going to have a list item view, and the list item view is just basically going to generate a list item. The only thing that I'm going to need for that list item is a contact, and I'm also going to need the selected contact ID. So in fact, if that list item is the selected contact ID, I can then show its details. And also what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use a little bit of inheritance. It's very, very basic, because in my listing page, which is basically going to be my index page for this controller, or for my index view for this controller action, what I'm going to need is pretty much the same model that I used before for my the donut hole method, which is, again, to have a selected contact ID and have a list of contacts. So this is going to be, what I'm going to do here is for my model, I'm going to go here and I'm going to create a class, and it's going to be, I'm going to call this my base view model. And one of the things that ends up getting done here, which is nice, is that based on your folder structure, it'll put the namespace here. So if you have another base view model, it's not going to clash with it. And what I'm going to do here, so I'm going to have these two view models, one of them for a list and one of them for an individual item. And they're going to have to share a couple of properties, and that's why I'm making this base view model. That's about the extent of the inheritance that I'm doing here. And what I'm going to say here, and again, you don't have to do this. You could repeat the code in both view models, but I think it's a good idea to see this. I'm going to have int selected contact ID. Okay. And I'm going to have public list contact. I'm sorry, that's actually incorrect. They're both going to share the selected contact ID. I'm also going to have this method public bool is selected. Okay, pass it a contact, and this is pretty much what I had done before. If the contact that I pass in is equal to the selected contact ID, then in fact it's selected. Okay, selected contact ID, and it's selected. And I'm going to go and build this. What I'm going to end up doing for my other view models is basically inherit from this view model. So this is just some, one integer value and whether or not it's selected. I'm going to add a class. I'm going to call this HTML fragment list view model. And the only thing that this is going to have, what I'm going to be able to do here is I'm going to be able to inherit from the base view model. Okay, and I'm just going to have one public property, which is going to be list contact contacts. Okay, so again, the base view model gives me this other property and this other method, and the only reason I'm doing this is because I want to actually have a HTML fragment item view model. So I'm going to go here. This will be HTML fragment item view model. And this is going to be a little bit simpler. The only thing that this is going to have is it's going to, again, inherit from the base view model. But this is going to have a contact that I'm going to get and set. Okay. I could build this. This will run. And I could actually start testing out some of this. Again, just to sort of see the direction that we're going here. If I look at my fragment controller here, what I'm going to do here is that this index page is going to end up getting a view model, which is going to be the HTML fragment list view model. Alright, if it doesn't find that class, do control dot, and it'll end up finding it. And what I'm going to do here is, again, I'm just going to get all my contacts from new contact BUS. Alright, if it doesn't see that, that's fine. It's actually going to be get contacts, and I'm going to do control dot here. Right, and I'll say get contacts, and I'm going to return model. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to build this, okay, and I'm going to cheat a little bit here, because one of the things that I'm also going to have is I'm going to have an action result, okay, and I'm going to call this action list item. Now, this is not going to, when I end up calling this, and I'm not going to call it yet, but this is actually going to have the item view model. And the only thing that I'm going to do here, in one of them I ended up populating the contacts. Here I'm going to actually populate the contact. Excuse me, get contact, model dot selected contact ID, and I could return view. And you can actually start testing some of this stuff out pretty easily. If I wanted to test out, I'm going to create this view, which is going to be the list item view, and I'm going to right click. Actually, let me make sure I build first here. And I'm going to right click, and I'm going to say add view. And the list model that I'm going to use here is going to be my HTML fragment item view model. Okay, here's my HTML fragment item view model. This is actually going to be a partial view. So since it's going to be a partial view, I'm going to say layout equals null. And these are going to be just list items. So what I'm going to show you here, I could actually call this with a fragment and simply say, here's a list item. And, just for starters now, we'll say model.contact, right? Because this is going to have one property, which is a contact. And I'll say full name, right? I can actually start testing this out. If I go into my page, and I use the HTML fragment controller, right? And I have this list item, right? If I did that, I haven't run into a problem here because I don't have a property. I don't have a selected item ID, selected contact ID that I'm passing. But if I go selected contact ID, and again, this is a page, it's a partial view. The user's not going to end up typing this into the URL. I'm just doing it for testing purposes. So selected contact, let's see what I called it. Selected contact ID equals 2, right? And I can see that this is this guy, right? Here's my first guy, and so on, and so forth. And what I want to do here is when I end up calling this thing, right, I'm going to go back to my view of selected item, and I'm just going to put in this is basically the same thing I did before. I'm going to put if model is selected, model.contact, then I'm going to output some additional information, an unordered list, and I'll put in model.contact first name, model.contact last name, and model.contact email. Okay, I'm also going to go in here, and I had done this before. Put it in here, and I'm going to say, hey, look, if model is selected, model.contact, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say class equals selected, otherwise string dot empty, and I'm going to go here and put it in the list item. So if I went here, all this is going to do now is that when I load this page, it's just going to display some detailed information as well, right? So first name, last name, email address. Okay. Now let's see how this ends up playing out, because what I have now is my partial view. Again, this is never going to end up being called directly. This is going to end up being called with an AJAX request. But if I go back to my controller, I've got this view, HTML fragment list view model. Okay. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go and say add view. So my view model here, this is going to be my view model for my list. So it's going to be my HTML fragment list view model. I don't need the script libraries. It's not going to be a partial view. Okay, and I'll click add. I'm going to call this HTML fragment, and I'm going to generate my list items. And the way that I'm going to do it is I'm going to say for each VAR contact in model.contacts, and instead of actually putting my list item here, what I'm going to say is I'm going to say HTML render partial. Okay, my partial is going to be this partial list item. Okay, the model for this is not going to be, this is where I'm not passing through this model, but I'm going to create a new HTML fragment item view model. All right, and it's not going to end up picking this up at first, but if you end up doing control dot, it'll end up finding the class. And at this point, we probably would be better off putting a using statement here to say something like and going in here and pulling out this namespace. And I think that's the right syntax. Is that right? Maybe I'm wrong about that. Not using, maybe import. All right, I'm gonna scrap that for now. I'll get back to you on that. So let me actually do the full namespace here. I'll take this out. Okay. So what I'm going to do here, let me actually, so HTML fragment, I could change the title too if I want to. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm just going to basically pass through the selected contact ID, which is going to be the model selected contact ID, okay? And the other parameter that I'm going to pass through here is the contact, which is basically just the contact that I'm looping over, okay? So if I save this, I should be able to go back here and go to the HTML fragment. It should do the index view, okay? And these are all my contacts. You can see there's nothing selected here, but if I was to go in here and say selected contact index equals 3, right? Let's see if that worked. Selected contact index. Let's make sure I'm calling this correctly. I'm sorry, selected contact ID. Apologize. So if I went in here and said selected contact ID equals 1, okay, I would see this guy show up, and so on and so forth. So, you know, if this was called with this value, that's fine. It's going to do exactly what it's going to do. So what I'm going to do here is, you know, this is not going to end up working initially, but I'm going to go to my list item, and I want to put that link in here. So instead of just having a static name here, okay, what I'm going to say is, all right, HTML action link, okay, and I'm going to get the full name, contact, full name, okay. The action that I want it to do, okay, is going to be the list item action, and the value that I want to pass to it is going to be the selected contact ID, which in this case, I basically want to change the selected contact ID to the model contact ID, right? And if I ended up going to this page, again, one thing that I had done in an earlier thing is that there's a select class, which is basically going to make this, you know, stand out here. So if I go back here and I reload this page, I've got these links. The only problem here is that this is going to go to the list item page, and it's basically going to get this HTML fragment, right? What I want to do is I want to, instead of having it go to this page, I want it to make an AJAX request and get this data and pop it back in the DOM and, you know, make this one look normal, okay? So instead of getting all my data, I just want to get an HTML fragment. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little bit of jQuery to do that, okay? And what I'll do here is on my listing page, you know, I've done this a couple of times already. I'm going to do this after my DOM ends up loading. And I'm going to get my, let me do this here. I'm going to give this an ID of contact list. And I'll say $UL pound contact list A. And I'm going to say live because these links are going to end up changing. I'm going to say live, click, function. And here, to just disable the links initially, I'll say return false. All right, and I'm going to take us here in you know, different in a series of changes. What I'm going to do here is, if, you know, I click on this, nothing's going to happen. Okay, so one of the things that I want to do is that I want to make the item that I'm clicking on. Well, actually, let me do this at least. If we happen to go to this page and we had selected contact ID is 2, at a minimum, when I click on this, I don't want this to be selected anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to be able to get, I'm going to move up from my link, right, which is, you know, the variable this is going to point to my link that I clicked on. but I'm actually going to be able to move up and say, hey, look, find me. It'll move up the tree. It's going to go to the parents. I could also use something called the closest, but again, I'm assuming that it's not contained in another list item. I'm going to say parents list item, okay? And this is going to be I'm going to call it LI, okay? And just as a quick thing here, I'm going to say li dot siblings, okay? So now I could get all the siblings of this list item. I really only need to find one of them, and I'll say, but it'll remove a class if the class exists, and it's going to remove selected, okay? So now if I go back here, I reload this page, right, second one is selected. If I click on this, it's no longer selected, but you can still see that these details are still there. So I'm going to go a step further, and I'm going to loop over. It might be an easier way to do this, but one of the things that I can do is I could say, hey, siblings collection. Each. That's going to allow me to loop over each of those list items, okay? And what this is going to allow me to do is say, hey, look, within each of those list items, okay, because now this is going to point to each of those list items. Within each of these sibling list items, I'm going to say this dot find any list items that are within this list item, and I'm going to remove them, okay? So this is going to take us part of the way there. If I reload this again, right, 2 is going to be selected. If I click on this, 2 is not selected, and also the details have been removed from the DOM. So the only thing that I have to do here is now I'm going to go about doing the hijacking of the link, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say $, get, and I've done this a couple times before. I'm going to get my link, get the href, okay, I'm hijacking the link, and all I'm getting back right now in this success function, I'm going to call it data, but in fact it really is nothing more than the list item. And so what I can then do at this point is I can say, hey, the list item that I had up here, okay, I'm going to end up replacing it with my data. Okay? So before, when we were doing this donut hole method, we'd get our data back and we'd find a part of it. Here I'm actually using all the data that I end up getting back. And now if I save this and I reload this page, right, I end up doing this. So even though, the donut hole gave me, very similar functionality, this is just a lot more efficient. If I was looking at what was coming back and cross over the wire, it's basically just this list item. So the next thing we'll end up doing is we'll see how we could even make it maybe a little bit more efficient by not even getting an HTML fragment back, but just getting JSON data. So you're seeing there's definitely a bit more work to do when we end up using an HTML fragment as opposed to using this the donut hole method, which we could look at the JavaScript here, and it's a lot, I would say, a bit more minimal than it is over here, okay? But it's definitely more efficient in terms of how much you're getting, how much data you have to go and fetch from the server.